Hey guys, so a couple of weeks ago, I talked about how I make socks in terms of how I take measurements, how I do gauge, how I do all of the calculations to make socks, but I didn't actually show you how I crank the sock. So that's what we're gonna do today. We're gonna go top to bottom from beginning to end. I'm gonna show you all the steps that I do to crank a sock. Hey there, thank you so much for being here today. My name is Felicia from SweetGeorgia and the School of SweetGeorgia. And today we are gonna crank a sock using this Erlbacher Speedster Circular Sock Knitting Machine, or CSM. Now, these are the socks that I'm gonna demonstrate how to make. And so you can see they're connected. This is one sock, this is a second sock. I'm gonna show you all the steps, so let's get started. Okay, so let's try to make a sock today. I'm gonna move my yarn carrier over to this marker. This is my 3 o'clock marker, and I'm going to just hang my sock bonnet here. Basically, I hang one loop on every other needle, and this is going to help me cast on all the stitches that I need. Okay, I'm just threading my machine with some waste yarn, and I'm going to add the waste yarn here. Hold down on the bottom of the bonnet so that I can add downward pressure and start casting on stitches. Any latches that were closed are not going to pick up the stitches correctly, so I'm just checking all the way around as I cast on. And now that these needles are up, I can finish hanging the loops of my bonnet. And that looks pretty good. So I'm going to stop here at the 3 o'clock mark, and then I'm going to add my main yarn. So for the main yarn, I'm going to be using SweetGeorgia Mohair Silk Sock, and this one is in the colorway Fizzy Water. Now I'm just dropping my tail in. I overlap the two yarns, the waste yarn and the new yarn. I overlap them for about 2 needles or so, just to make sure that they'll all catch. And then I'm just going to crank one row very slowly. Make sure that everything is okay. And then I'm going to add my buckle, add all of my weights, and then I also add the heel spring, just because I like what it does to the fabric and the gauge, and it makes everything a little bit tighter, and so I do like that. I'm going to reset my counter. And then I crank 20 rounds for the hung hem. So I'll go ahead and do that. Now you can hear that click, click, click sound, right? If you want to minimize that clicking sound, what you can do is you can see this little flipper here. This little flipper is what's making that clicking sound. Every time the flipper, which is kind of spring-loaded, every time it hits one of the needles, that's what's making the clicking sound. So it goes click, click. So if you don't want that sound, if you want to minimize that sound, you can raise that little flipper a little bit. And then I'm using here a little quilting clip. This is for binding quilts. And I just clip the little flipper with the binding clip and just hold on to it like that. And then when you crank around, the sound is going to be minimized because it's not, the little flipper is not going to be hitting those needles every time you go around. So that is 20. So now I'm going to take the weight off of the bottom. I'm going to take the buckle off of the bottom. So there's no weight on the sock right now. And now I'm going to hang the hem. So I look at the little loops of the main yarn that are here in the line with the waste yarn. And so I look at this loop and I kind of run my eye up, 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 up this line, kind of like looking at the whole ladder and going all the way up. And then I see that it is in between these two needles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up this loop and I'm going to run it up and put it on the needle to the right. This is just my convention. This is how I remember everything. And then once I have that marked, then I can just pop all of the other stitches on. So just going in line, picking up the little loops and hanging them on each of the needles. Okay, so now I can't access these needles on this side, so I'm just going to crank forward. I'm going to pull down with my hand, with my left hand, I'm going to pull down on the bottom of the bonnet and then crank forward. So you can see here, stitches are kind of coming up because there's not enough tension pulling them down. So now we just finish hanging all of the stitches. Okay, so that is all the stitches hung. I'm going to put the buckle back on and then add all of my weights back. Now I reset my counter to 0. So now that I've reset the counter, now I'm going to crank all of my leg rows. So I've just predetermined that I'm going to crank 60 rows for that, and so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So now that I've reached 60 rows, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop my carrier just before the 3 o'clock mark. I need to be able to access those stitches here. So I have my halfway marks marked here and here. That's my 9 o'clock and my 3 o'clock. And I'm just going to go 1 stitch over, and then I'm going to raise all of the back needles. And so there's 1 extra stitch outside of my halfway marks. And so now I'm going to work the heel. You have to remember to remove the clip if you're using this. Otherwise, all of your stitches will fall off when you do the heel. And all I do is I crank past, I hear that last click, and all of these stitches are out of work right now. None of these stitches are going to be knit. And all I do is I raise 1, 2 needles. And then I'm going to crank back. So you can see 2 needles here. These are both 2 stitches here are being wrapped. And then again on this side, I'm going to lift 1, lift 2, and I'm going to crank back. And at this point, it's really important to start looking and checking to make sure that all of these stitches keep coming down. That's where I'm going to start adding my heel forks or my heel weights. And so this heel weight, there's 3 of them, and I put one here in the middle. It's going to stay in the center as close to the top as I can. And here's another one. It's going to go on this side as close to the top as I can. And the third one. There we go. So we have raised 2 on this side. We've raised 2 on this side. So now that I'm coming around, I'm going to raise just 1 now. Raise 1, raise 1, and I just go back and forth, raising 1 and wrapping that stitch on either side of the heel until I reach these marks. These are my heel marks. So once I get to these marks, I'm going to stop what I'm doing, and then I'm going to change and finish off the short row heel. So keep going. All the time, it's really important to make sure that your stitches are coming down to the base of the needles. If they're not, if they're riding up, then it's time to move your heel forks. Okay, and so that's the last one. So I'm going to wrap that one and crank all the way around. Okay, so now we're going backwards. So now the first thing I do is I'm going to lower 2 on the right hand side. And so lowering 2 and making sure those latches are open, and they're going to stay open as I crank back around. I sometimes hold on to the yarn so that it doesn't just kind of miss that stitch. I'm going to make sure very carefully that that first 2 stitches knit. And then again on this side, pushing down 2 stitches, making sure those latches are open and that they don't close accidentally as I'm doing this first round. So knitting 1, 2, that looks good. Making sure all the stitches stay down at the base of the needles. So again, moving those heel forks up. And now I'm going to just go one at a time, lowering 1 needle at a time. That's 1. Don't push down too far, because if you push down too far, then the latch will close and you will drop the stitch. So you have to make sure that that latch stays open as the carrier passes. And then it can close as you go around. Okay, so now I'm going to just pause right here for a second because I just have these 2 needles which are wrapped. And what I want to do is I want them all to knit together so that it makes a smooth, smooth join at the corner of my short row heel. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to return all of my stitches back to work. And make sure that all the latches are open. That one's closed. Making sure they're all open. And then I'm going to crank very slowly around the whole thing. Okay, fantastic. So now I'm going to reset my counter and then I can start cranking all the foot rows. Okay, so now in this case, I'm also going to do 60 foot rows. So we can add the little clip back to minimize the sound if you like. Okay, that's 60. So now we're going to crank the toe. This is going to be the short row toe. So I go all the way to my halfway marks, raise the back half. And again, removing the clip. And cranking until you hear that last click. Then I'm going to do the same as before. I'm going to raise 2 on the right hand side, crank across, raise 2 on this side, on the left side. And from now on, just picking up 1 needle. Okay, move those heel forks up to make sure that you have enough tension on all of your stitches so that nothing falls off of your needles. You're getting to the end, so you don't want to drop any of your stitches. That would be not fun right now. Okay, now I'm going to do the same. I'm going to push down 2 stitches to close off the toe. 2 needles. 2 needles on this side. And then 1 needle on each side. So 1. Okay, so now I have these 2 needles that are wrapped, so I'm going to return all of my stitches back to work. And again, make sure that all of the latches are open. That one is closed. And I'm going to crank 1 round around. I'm going to stop right here before my 3 o'clock mark, And that is the end of sock number 1. So now I'm gonna take the yarn out and then add my waste yarn. Okay, so now we are ready to start the next sock. So those are the steps that I take every time I crank a sock. Now, with the commentary, as I was filming it, the first sock took about 30 minutes to crank. The second sock, without talking to the camera or doing anything like that, the second sock took 16 minutes to crank from beginning to end. And so I find that the longest part of this whole process is hanging the hem. So hanging those stitches, finding the stitches off of the waste yarn and hanging them stitch by stitch, that takes about 6 minutes out of the entire process. The rest of it is actually pretty quick. And of course, it's going to depend on how long your foot is, how many leg rows you have, all of that kind of stuff. For these first 2 socks, I used my normal heel forks. These are the heel forks that come with my Erlbacher, so you can see they are the same color. They're painted this beautiful color. But because these socks are sort of on the small side, I had quite a bit of yarn left over at the end of the day. And so I thought I'm going to crank one more sock and see how it works with this device. So this is a new tool that I got. This is called the Sweet Spot V hook. So this is meant to replace 3 of these. So normally what I do is I take these 3 heel forks, I hang one in the middle, and then I hang one on each side. And so as I crank the heel and the toes, I have to sort of move and shift those 3 heel forks multiple times throughout the process. So this is the Sweet Spot heel fork that I got from Chambord in Quebec. And the idea with this heel fork is you just need one of them. So rather than having 3 of these heel forks, you just replace them all with this one device. And you, as per its name, you have to find the sweet spot. You have to put it in exactly the best spot where it's going to provide the most downward force over the entire width of the heel or the toe. And so I found that I had to kind of like squeeze it a little bit and then drop it in and then hang it relatively close to the top. But then as the weight sort of, as you crank the rows, this sort of starts to move down and it evens out the downward pressure. So you can see this is the fork itself, and then this is the weight that goes onto it like so. And so if you find exactly the right spot to put this, then you don't actually need to adjust the heel fork very often. I think I maybe adjusted it just once or twice during the heel on this particular sock, whereas the 3 sets of heel forks, I would move them quite frequently actually. Every couple of rounds I would move the heel forks up. I don't mind doing that. I feel like I have very precise control over where the downward pressure is. But if you use this, if you kind of tweak it and play with it, get it into the right spot, this could be really, really helpful and save you a lot of time, because then you don't need to make a lot of adjustments to the weight on your heel. So that's just one of the things that I have been playing with. So that is basically how I make a sock from beginning to end. This is how I've been making all of the socks that I've been working on right now. And I have still tons to learn. You might watch this video and say, well, I do my heels a little bit differently. I do my short rows a little bit differently. That's totally fine. There's a lot of different ways that people do these heels and toes. There's so much to learn. And so now that I've sort of figured out this particular system, I'm going to go off and learn a few new things as well. And as part of that, I have signed up for the Erlbacher Crank-In, which is going to happen at the beginning of May. I'm very, very excited about this. This is an event that is hosted by Erlbacher, I believe, every year, and it includes everything from sort of workshops about how to use the machine, how to use the ribber. It includes demonstrations about how to make all sorts of other different things, and it includes a tour where you can go and visit the factory where all of the CSMs are actually manufactured. So I'm very, very, very much looking forward to that. If you happen to be going to the Erlbacher Crank-In too, please do leave a comment and let me know that you're coming. I would love to meet you there. I'm super excited about this. This is going to be my first ever event taking this anywhere. This has not ever left my house. And so the next challenge is figuring out how to pack this to go to an event like a crank can. So that is basically it for today. Thank you so much for being with me to chat about all these things to do with knitting socks on a circular sock knitting machine. I would love to see you back here again. I come here every Friday, almost every Friday, to talk about something to do with color and craft and yarn. We talk about knitting, we talk about weaving, we sometimes talk about spinning, dyeing, all sorts of things here to do with the fiber arts. So thank you so much for being here today. I will see you in the next one. All right, bye for now.